Welcome to the Hauntline. Tonight, we delve into the fabric of reality, a place where the steady march of seconds can stutter, can vanish, leaving behind a void of pure, unadulterated dread. What happens when your life is punctuated by a daily, inexplicable absence? 13 minutes, gone like smoke. This is the story of Sarah, and the day her clock and her sanity began to unravel. Sarah Jennings was a creature of habit, her life a meticulously curated symphony of schedules and to-do lists. She found comfort in predictability, in the neat columns of her digital calendar, the precise timing of her morning coffee, the unwavering certainty that 60 seconds made a minute and 60 minutes made an hour, until Tuesday. It was an aggressively ordinary Tuesday. Sun slanted through her home office window, dust motes dancing in the golden bars. Sarah was finalizing a presentation, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She glanced at the digital clock on her monitor. 3:16 p.m. She remembered feeling a slight pressure behind her eyes, a momentary weariness from staring at the screen. She blinked, a long, slow blink. When her eyelids fluttered open, the clock read 3:30 p.m. Sarah frowned. That couldn't be right. She felt like she'd blinked, nothing more. A brief lapse in concentration, perhaps. But 14 minutes? She looked around the room. Her tea, previously steaming, was now tepid. The sunbeam had shifted noticeably across her desk. A draft whispered through the room, ruffling the papers beside her laptop, papers she didn't remember being disturbed. Her first thought was the clock. A power surge? Unlikely. Her laptop was plugged in. Her phone, resting beside it, also displayed 3:30 p.m. Her smartwatch, synced to atomic time, concurred. A wave of disorientation washed over her. She must have zoned out, fallen into a micro-sleep, but she didn't feel groggy or as if she'd woken up. She felt alert, just displaced, like stepping out of a movie theater into bright daylight, her senses struggling to recalibrate. She tried to reconstruct the lost time. What had she been typing? She scrolled back through her document. The last sentence was half finished, ending abruptly mid-word. The projected growth indicates a significant upswing. Nothing. No frantic deletions. No accidental keystrokes. Just an ending. She shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. Stress. It had to be stress. She'd been working too hard. She made a mental note to take a proper break, maybe go for a walk later. She saved her work, the cursor blinking accusingly at the truncated sentence, and tried to push the unsettling feeling aside. It was just a blip, a weird 14-minute blip. But the next day, Wednesday, at precisely 3:16 p.m., as she was stirring sugar into her afternoon tea in the kitchen, it happened again. One moment, the spoon clinked against porcelain, the scent of Earl Grey filling the air. The next, the microwave was beeping, signaling the end of a cycle she hadn't started. Her tea was cold on the counter. The kitchen clock, her phone, her watch, all showed 3:29 p.m., 13 minutes, gone. Not 14 like yesterday. Exactly 13. This time the unease was a cold knot in her stomach. This wasn't stress. This was something else. Something impossible. Thursday. Sarah was prepared, or so she thought. She'd spent the morning researching transient global amnesia, fugue states, temporal lobe seizures. None of it quite fit. There was no confusion before or after, no headaches, no physical symptoms beyond a growing, gnawing anxiety. At 3 p.m., she set up her phone to record video, positioning it to capture both herself and the digital clock on her wall. She sat at her desk, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the advancing numerals. 3:15 p.m. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 3:16 p.m. She held her breath, bracing herself. The numbers on the clock seemed to shimmer. She felt that now familiar faint pressure behind her eyes, a peculiar lightness in her head. She focused on the phone, willing it to keep recording, to capture the moment of transition, the glitch in her world. Her phone was vibrating on the desk, a notification. The screen read, "Recording stopped, storage full." The timestamp on the notification, 3:31 p.m. The clock on the wall, 3:31 p.m. She looked at the video file. It was exactly 16 minutes long, ending precisely at 3:16 p.m., just before the critical moment. But the file size was enormous, far larger than 16 minutes of footage should be. And the last few frames before it cut off were a blur of static, a cascade of corrupted pixels. The recording hadn't stopped at 3:16 p.m. It had recorded something for 13 minutes, something her phone couldn't process, something that had filled its memory with nothingness or something worse. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. 13 minutes, every day, always starting at 3:17 p.m., not 3:16 p.m., as she'd initially thought. The loss began at 3:17 p.m., making her reappear at 3:30 p.m. She tried explaining it to her sister, Chloe. "You think I'm what? Dissociating? Chloe, I'm not making this up. 13 minutes just vanish." Chloe's concern was palpable, but it was the gentle, placating kind. "Maybe you should see Dr. Evans, Sarah, just to talk things through." Dr. Evans, her GP, listened patiently, then prescribed mild sedatives and recommended a neurologist. "Memory lapses can be caused by a variety of factors, Sarah. Stress, fatigue. We'll run some tests, but try not to worry." No one believed her. To them, she was overworked, stressed, perhaps teetering on the edge of a breakdown. The more she insisted, the more their eyes glazed over with that particular brand of sympathetic dismissal. The isolation was a suffocating blanket. She started to doubt herself. Was she losing her mind? Were these minutes truly gone, or was her brain simply erasing them, a faulty delete key in her own consciousness? She began to live her life in two distinct phases. The time before 3:17 p.m., filled with a frantic, anticipatory dread, and the time after 3:30 p.m., grappling with the renewed certainty of the void and the crushing weight of being utterly alone in her experience. The 13 minutes themselves were a black hole, sucking in light, sound, and her own sanity. Weeks turned into a month. The 13-minute lacuna at 3:17 p.m. became a grim, unshakable fixture in Sarah's life. She'd stopped trying to convince anyone. Instead, she retreated inwards, her world shrinking to the confines of her apartment and the strange, anonymous comfort of online forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. She lurked, reading stories of alien abduction, shadow people, and lost time, feeling a perverse sense of camaraderie with these unseen, unheard individuals. She never posted her own story. It felt too raw, too real, too specific. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, trawling through a forum titled Temporal Anomalies and Perceptual Oddities, a post caught her eye. It was brief, almost hesitant, written by a user named Chronosecco. Has anyone else experienced very specific recurring microlapses in time? Not minutes or hours, but a precise, repeating duration. For me, it's always in the afternoon. About 10 to 15 minutes. It's disorienting. Feels like my internal clock just skips. Am I alone in this? Sarah's breath hitched. Specific, recurring microlapses. Precise, repeating duration. Her fingers trembled as she typed a reply the first time she'd engaged. What time does this happen for you? And how long exactly? She hit send, her heart pounding. She didn't expect a response. Or if she did, she expected it to be vague, misremembered, ultimately different. An hour later, a notification pinged. A private message from Chronosecco. It's oddly specific. It starts at 3:17 p.m. every day, and it lasts for exactly 13 minutes. I know it sounds crazy. Sarah stared at the screen, tears welling in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of profound, earth-shattering relief, and a new, creeping terror. She wasn't alone. The implications of that were almost too much to bear. She messaged back immediately. It's not crazy, or if it is, we're crazy together. It happens to me too. Exactly the same. 3:17 p.m., 13 minutes. His name was Ben Carter. He lived 3 states away, a software developer who, like Sarah, valued logic and precision. He'd been experiencing the missing 13 minutes for almost as long as she had. He'd gone through the same cycle of disbelief, doctors, self-doubt. He'd also started to meticulously document it, noting the precise start and end times, the unsettling consistency. They exchanged frantic messages, then emails, then agreed to a video call. Seeing his face, hearing his voice articulate the same bizarre, unbelievable experiences she'd endured was like finding a fellow castaway on a desolate island. When it happens, Ben said, his image slightly pixelated on her screen, what do you feel right before? Pressure, Sarah replied, behind my eyes, a sort of lightness, like I'm about to float away. And sometimes just before I hear a click, a tiny metallic sound. Ben's eyes widened. The click? Yes, I hear that too. Like a switch being thrown somewhere. They talked for hours, comparing notes, sharing their failed experiments, their fears, their desperate theories. Was it environmental, neurological, some kind of shared delusion, triggered by an unknown external factor? Or was it something far stranger, something that hinted at the fundamental instability of their perceived reality? The relief of shared experience was immense, but it was quickly overshadowed by a more profound dread. If this was happening to two people, completely unconnected, who else was out there? Losing 13 minutes every day at 3:17 p.m.? And more importantly, why? Sarah and Ben became unlikely partners in a terrifyingly intimate investigation. Their shared experience forged a bond of desperate trust. They documented everything, creating shared spreadsheets, timelines, noting any correlating events, however mundane. Weather patterns, solar flares, news headlines. They searched for any external trigger, any common denominator beyond the unyielding precision of 3:17 p.m. and the 13-minute void. Nothing. The phenomenon remained stubbornly insular, affecting only them, or so they thought. Ben, with his analytical mind, proposed a more direct approach. We need to observe each other somehow during the event, or try to. If we're both on a video call when it hits, Sarah felt a chill. What if the call just drops, or the recording corrupts, like with my phone? Maybe, Ben conceded, but what if it doesn't? What if one of us remains aware, or if we see something in the other person? The unspoken fear was, what if they both vanish from the call, only to reappear 13 minutes later, with no memory and another corrupted file? But the alternative, doing nothing, simply enduring the daily erasure, was becoming unbearable. They decided to try. The following Monday, at 3:10 p.m., they initiated a video call, both setting up secondary cameras to record their respective rooms, hoping one might capture what the other missed. "Okay," Ben said, his voice tight. 7 minutes, everything recording your end? "Yes," Sarah confirmed, her gaze fixed on the clock overlay on her screen. "You?" "All systems go." He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Feels like we're about to jump out of a plane without parachutes." "Something like that," Sarah whispered. The minutes crawled by, thick with anticipation. 3:15 p.m. Sarah could feel the familiar pressure building behind her eyes. She saw Ben swallow hard, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his desk. 3:16 p.m. "I hear it," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "The click." On her screen, Ben nodded, his eyes wide. "Me too." Then, at the exact moment the clock should have ticked over to 3:17 p.m., Sarah's screen showing Ben froze. Not into a corrupted static, but a perfect, still image. Ben, mid-blink, mouth slightly open. Sarah tried to speak, but no sound came out. She couldn't move. It wasn't paralysis in the typical sense. She felt her body, but it was as if she were encased in thick, invisible amber. She could see her room, her own frozen hands on her keyboard. The only thing that seemed to move was time itself, or rather, her perception of it. It stretched, then compressed, then ceased. There was no darkness, no light, no sound, just absence, a null state. It wasn't like being unconscious, it was like not being at all, yet somehow retaining a thread of awareness of that not being. a silent, screaming paradox. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. Ben was back on her screen, gasping, his eyes wild. Sarah? Sarah, are you there? I'm here, she choked out, her voice raw. What did you see? You froze, he said, his voice shaking. Just a still image for 13 minutes. My clock jumped from 3:16 to 3:30. My secondary recording. It's just a 13-minute still frame of my empty chair. It's like I wasn't even there for it to record. Yours? Sarah checked her own secondary recording. The file was there, but it was only 16 minutes long, ending at 3:16 p.m., showing her freezing in place. The next file started at 3:30 p.m., showing her gasping back into awareness. The 13 minutes in between? Corrupted. Unreadable. I think we're not losing time, Ben, Sarah said slowly, a horrifying understanding dawning. I think we're being paused, put on hold, removed from the stream. Ben was pale. But by what? And why us? The investigation had yielded not answers, but deeper, more terrifying questions. They weren't just experiencing a glitch, they were the glitch. The pause theory changed everything. If they were being removed from the normal flow of time, what did that mean for their physical bodies? Were they in stasis? Were they vulnerable? And what, if anything, occupied the space they vacated? They couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, not by human eyes, but by something other. Something that operated on principles so alien they couldn't begin to comprehend them. The 13 minutes felt less like an absence and more like a deliberate, scheduled extraction. Ben, ever the pragmatist, focused on the number 13. It's such a specific number. 13 minutes. Not 10, not 15. Why? Sarah had no answers. The number echoed with superstitions, but that felt too simplistic for something so technologically precise, so chillingly consistent. They decided on a new experiment, riskier than before. They wouldn't just observe the onset of the event. They would try to interact with their environment during the 13 minutes, or at least leave evidence of their awareness if any part of them remained functional within that null state. The plan was simple, almost childishly so. They would each hold a pen, poised over a piece of paper. If, during the pause, any flicker of consciousness or motor control remained, they would try to make a mark, any mark. The dread leading up to 3:17 p.m. that day was a physical weight. They set up their cameras, their audio recorders, their pens held tight. Sarah felt the familiar descent into the null, the sensation of being outside time, a detached observer of her own suspended animation. But this time, she focused with all her might on the pen in her hand, on the blank paper beneath it. Move, just a twitch, a line, anything. It was like trying to swim through solid rock. Her will, her intention, felt like a distant echo, unable to bridge the gap to her physical body. The 13 minutes stretched into an eternity of silent, powerless effort. The whispers seemed louder this time, swirling around her disembodied consciousness, cold and ancient. Sarah gasped, her pen clattering away. Her hand ached from the effort of her mental command. She looked at her paper, blank, utterly, damningly blank. Ben? She managed, her voice hoarse. On the screen, Ben looked devastated. He slowly held up his own piece of paper, also blank. Nothing, he whispered. I couldn't. I wasn't there. Or I was, but I was disconnected. But then Sarah noticed something. On her desk, next to her blank paper, lay her phone. It had been placed screen down before the event. Now, it was screen up. A small thing, easily missed. She wouldn't have remembered moving it, but she was meticulous about her desk. Ben, she said slowly, my phone. It's been moved, just slightly. Did you see anything on your end? Before the feed cut, or after it came back? Ben frowned, thinking. No. Wait, my desk lamp. It's angled differently. I always have it pointing directly at my keyboard. Now it's shifted towards the window. They both fell silent. It wasn't them. During those 13 minutes, while they were suspended, something else had interacted with their environment. Minor, almost imperceptible changes. A phone flipped. A lamp adjusted. Why? Were they specimens in some unfathomable experiment? Were these minor adjustments part of the observation? Or was something else present in their spaces? Something that moved unseen while they were pinned outside of time. The thought was infinitely more terrifying than simply losing time. It implied an intelligence, a presence that was not just aware of them, but could interact with their world while they were helpless. The 13 minutes were not empty. They were occupied. Sarah and Ben never found out who or what was responsible for the 13-minute voids. They never understood the purpose of the subtle alterations in their environments. The daily skips in time continued, a non-negotiable fixture of their lives. They stopped trying to fight it, stopped trying to understand it in terms they could grasp. Acceptance wasn't the right word. It was more like a grim surrender, a weary adaptation to a reality that had fundamentally fractured. They continued to check in with each other, a lifeline in their shared, bizarre exile. Sometimes, new, minor anomalies would occur during the missing time. A book pulled slightly from a shelf, a cup moved from one side of the counter to the other. Never anything overt, never anything that could prove to the outside world that something extraordinary was happening. Just tiny, unsettling ripples in the pond of their existence. They wondered if there were others. Were they part of a larger group? A silent, unwilling collective of the temporally displaced? Or were they truly alone? Two random data points in an experiment too vast, too alien to ever comprehend. The fear never truly left. It became a quiet hum beneath the surface of their days, a constant reminder of their fragility, of the thin veil between the known and the profoundly, terrifyingly unknown. They were living, breathing paradoxes, existing within, and yet, for 13 minutes each day, utterly outside of time. And in that stolen interlude, something else walked in their shoes, touched their things, and watched. What would you do if 13 minutes of your life were excised each day without explanation, without recourse, How long before the lines of your own sanity began to blur? How long before you realized that the clock doesn't just measure time, it measures your place in a reality that might be far more malleable and far more sinister than you could ever imagine. The void Sarah and Ben experienced was precise, unwavering. But it leaves us wondering about the less precise moments in our own lives. The times we zone out, the instances of déjà vu, the feeling of a minute lost or gained. Are these just tricks of the mind? Or are they fainter echoes of something like the 317 anomaly, small tears in the fabric, quickly mended, mostly unnoticed? Perhaps some doors are best left unopened, and some silences are best left unbroken. The unknown has a way of seeping into the cracks of our understanding, doesn't it? Sarah and Ben's story is a chilling reminder that our perception of time, of reality itself, might be more fragile than we dare to believe. What lurks in those lost moments, those silent intervals we cannot account for. Thank you for tuning in to the Hauntline. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a chill or a question in the deep recesses of your mind, please consider sharing it with someone who appreciates the unsettling. Don't forget to like this episode. Subscribe to the Hauntline for more journeys into the shadows, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our weekly descent into the uncanny. We're always searching for the stories that haunt the edges of our world. Until next time, listen closely to the silence. You never know what you might hear.